This is a presentation on subtracting mixed numbers by Mathematically Marcia. Okay, when subtracting mixed numbers, very similar to adding, we're going to take the numerators and subtract those, and the whole numbers and subtract those. The common denominator is going to stay the same. So when I subtract the whole numbers, 4 minus 3, I get 1. When I subtract the numerators, I get 0 and then over 2. Of course, 0 over 2 is nothing, so this answer just simplifies to 1. 1/2 minus 1/2 is 0. So you wouldn't want to leave 1 and 0 over 2. Change your final answer to simplify and make it 1. Okay, again, first of all, check and make sure you have common denominators, which we do. So you're going to subtract your mixed numbers, and you're going to subtract your whole numbers. Your numerators. So 3 minus 3 is 0. And then 3 minus 1 is 2. That common denominator is 4. Now, we don't actually need the 0 in our final answer. And 2 over 4 can be reduced. They can both be divided by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So my final answer is 1/2. Okay, we do not have common denominators on this one. So that's the first thing we need to do. Our denominators are 3 and 2. So our common denominator is going to be 6. The whole number part, we will leave the same. And then here we have to do 3 times 2 to get 6. So I do 2 times 2. Which is 4. Do 2 times 3 to get 6, so 1 times 3 would be 3. So now we subtract the whole numbers. 2 minus 1 is 1. 4 minus 3 is 1. And we keep the common denominator of 6. When I check it and look at it, 1 over 6 can't be reduced, so 1 and 1 over 6 is my final answer. Okay, 5 1/4 minus 3 1/2. Once again, first thing we need to do is make sure we have a common denominator, and we do not. So our denominator this time is going to be 4. The whole number part does not change. So this denominator didn't change, it's just times 1, so that numerator is 1. This denominator has to be multiplied by 2, so we do 1 times 2, which is 2. Now when we go to subtract, we have a little problem here. We can't do 1 minus 2, so we have to borrow. We borrow from a whole number. We're going to make that a 4, and we're going to add 4 over 4. The reason we add 4 over 4 is 4 over 4 actually reduces to 1. So we took 1 from the whole number portion, and we're adding 1 to the fraction. So we're not really changing the value of it, it's balancing out. We're just changing the look of it. The reason we use 4 is because that's what my denominator is. Remember, to add, you have to have common denominators. So after doing that, we now have 4 and 5 over 4. Yes, we do have a improper fraction within a mixed number, which is normally not something you would want to do, but sometimes it's necessary when you're subtracting fractions. So now to finish subtracting, let's subtract the whole numbers. 4 minus 3 is 1. 5 minus 2 is 3. And of course our common denominator is still 4. 3 over 4 cannot be reduced, so that is my final answer. Okay, there is, if borrowing seems difficult to you, let's look at a different way we could look at this and do this instead. Let's start back with 5 and 1 over 4 minus 3 and 1 over 2. Instead of having to borrow, we're going to change both of these to improper fractions. 4 times 5 is 20, plus 1 is 21 over 4. And then 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7 over 2. Now we have improper fractions. Sometimes they're easier to subtract. Now we still have to get a common denominator, and that will still be 4. This one doesn't change, so that's still 21. Let's multiply that by 2, so that by 2. So that would be 14. So then when we subtract, 21 minus 14 is 7. And then our common denominator is 4. Now we would need to take 7 over 4, change it back to a mixed number. So we still get 1 and 3 over 4. All right, let's look at this next example. Again, we need to start by getting a common denominator. So that would be 6. We're going to leave the whole number portion the same. And then 3 times 2 is 6. So that would give me 4. And 6 times 1, that would give me 5. Again, we have the same problem. We can't subtract 4 minus 5. So we need to borrow. So we'll subtract 1 here, making it 5, and add 1 here by adding 6 over 6. Remember, I'm doing 6 over 6 because that's what my denominator is. So I now have 5 and 10 over 6. And notice we're not changing the second fraction at all. You only have to borrow in the first one. Okay, now subtract the whole number part, and we get 5 minus 3 is 2. And then 10 minus 5 is 5. And that common denominator is 6. 5 over 6 cannot be reduced. So 2 and 5 over 6 is my final answer. Okay, and let's look at this one also. Do it by changing it to improper fractions. It's a lot of changing back and forth, but for many people it's easier than having to borrow. So change first one to a mixed number. 3 times 6 is 18, plus 2 is 20 over 3. 6 times 3 is 18, plus 5 is 23 over 6. Now it looks like that's not going to work either, but remember we don't have common denominator yet. So our denominator is 6. This one has to be multiplied by 2. So we have 40 over 6 minus 23 over 6, which gives us 40 minus 23 is 17 over 6. Now let's change that back to a mixed number. So 6 will go into 17 2 times, the remainder of 5. So it is 2 and 5 over 6. All right, 7 1/5 minus 2 1/2. Let's again start by getting a common denominator, which will be 10. And then the whole number part stays the same for right now, at least. And then 5 times 2 is 10, so I need 1 times 2, which is 2. 2 times 5 is 10, so I need 1 times 5, which is 5. And again, we're going to have to borrow because we can't do 2 minus 5. So we take 1 away from the 7, make it 6, and we add 10 over 10. Again, we use 10 because the denominator is 10. So that gives me 6 and 12 over 10. Notice the denominator doesn't change because you add, you keep that same denominator, you don't change it. And then minus 2 and 5 over 10. So now 6 minus 2 is 4. 12 minus 5 is 7. So 4 and 7 over 10, which cannot be reduced. Now let's look at the same problem and solve it by changing it to improper fractions. This method is especially helpful when you start doing negative fractions. Then it definitely makes it a little bit simpler to see things. Improper fractions are just easier to work with than mixed numbers generally. All right, so 7 1/5 would be 36 over 5. 2 1/2 would be 5 over 2. So we do still need to get a common denominator of 10. This has to be multiplied by 2. You get 72. So it has to be multiplied by 5. You get 25. One problem, or might be an issue with this, is you do get bigger numbers to work with than you do with the mixed numbers. But again, it does avoid having to borrow. So now 72 minus 50 or 25 would be 47. Of course, keep the common denominator over 10 and then change it back to a mixed number. So 10 goes into 47 4 times, remainder of 7. So it does change to 4 and 7 over 10. Okay, if you found this video helpful, please hit the like button below. Share your questions, comments, or requests for future videos in the comments section. And subscribe to my channel so you can see more videos like this. And thank you for watching.